Now it's my turn to ask some questions. Let me just start. Why now? Why in our history, in our nation's history, in our society, are we talking so much about religion? Why is the issue so pointed right now? Let me ask you, Professor, why now?
I think an easy answer is to look at the resurgence of the Christian right post-Roe v. Wade. I think no movement has been singularly more important in American political history than the one who was authored by some of the people who are in fact on this stage, and names associated with it would include the Reverend Jerry Falwell, for example. Christian evangelicalism arose. The sleeping giant was awoken in 1976 with the election of Jimmy Carter, for whom Christian evangelicals were very enthusiastic about. Of course, as we know, by 1979, they soured on President Carter and they threw their weight behind President Reagan. So the simple answer is the resurgence of a very well-organized, astonishingly dynamic, and very industrious Christian evangelicalism in the United States has created something rather new. And what I think is rather new is we have an organized mass constituency that aggressively wishes to reintroduce the idea of bringing faith and values into the public sphere. To me, that's what's new.
So what's so scary about that, Bishop?
I don't think anything is scary about it at all, Evan. We are not as organized as you may think. What you think is that there are master puppeteers sitting behind the screen somewhere saying, you think this way, move that way. That's not the case. What happened in 2004 in Ohio, for example, was that one African-American statesman and a white evangelical preacher began to travel to churches, and a grassroots movement sprung up that fought for marriage, and it defied the typical barriers in the church. In other words, white Christians and black Christians typically don't vote the same way, but they came together. And I think it scares folks who don't have the faith that we have that there's this mobilization, but the mobilization was actually around real populist values, things that we all should believe in, and that's family, and we should believe in the basic institutions of our nation.
Well, do you want to?
Well, you know, I have much of the same faith that you just described, but what does scare me is not the faith. What scares me is the fact that the so-called religious right, those people who self-identify, 18 to 24% of the American people who self-identify with the religious right, and who apparently want to control everyone's life from the moment of conception, literally, until the moment of death, as we saw in the clip of Mrs. Terry Schiavo, and pretty much every minute in between. It's that sense that moral conscience is not to be permitted unless it happens to be circumscribed by the same reading of the Bible that you have or Mr. Colson has.
In all due respect to you, there is, in fact, a biblical anchor to the value of life. And if you don't look at that anchor, and that's what our book, Personal Faith, Public Policy, attempts to do, give people a perception of that anchor, that scriptural basis, you'll think that we're all over the map trying to control everything, but really, there are only a few principles that we hold to.
As a Mr. Colson?
I'm going to give you tonight, Mr. Lynn, a copy of my book, The Faith, which is just out, in which I trace the role of Christians in public life all the way back to the first century. You need to remember that this whole business, this stereotype of Jerry Falwell imposing our views on an unwilling electorate didn't start with Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. It started with Abraham Lincoln, who was accused by slave owners of wanting to impose his views. And thank God, through the political process, and ultimately, though it cost us a civil war, he did so. We all have the right to impose. One thing Christians have been consistently opposed to, when it's happened, it's been an aberration, it has not been the norm, is theocracy, because Augustine argued that we have a free will. It is part of being made in the image of God. So therefore, as Martin Luther said, you cannot coerce conversions. We don't want to coerce anybody into anything. We don't want to control how you live from conception to natural death, but we want to give you the right to live from conception to natural death and not have your life taken unwillingly.
Well, that's interesting. Of course, the Bible, as I'm sure my partner would suggest also, doesn't even discuss the issue of abortion, and in fact has a varying set of principles about when life can be taken. I don't think anymore that we can use a single source of a Bible scripture to determine what the policy of the United States should be about abortion, any more than the fact that Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," should be the definitive answer on the question of capital punishment. We live in a multicultural, multi-religious society where we do not make laws. I've never advocated that either of you not say what you believe. You certainly do that. The point is, politicians must rely on secular justifications, not Bible quoting contests on the floor of Congress to resolve these issues.